Hey everyone, I'm your host Emily. Welcome back to the channel. I'm coming to you from Berlin, Germany, where the geopolitical tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Forget the usual stuffy summit reports. What's happening right here, right now, isn't just about Europe. It's about a complete, high stakes overhaul of the Western world order that is going to land right on your doorstep, impacting everything from your economic stability to the long term safety of the entire globe. The mood here is tense, almost brittle. European leaders are in a full blown sprint against three massive deadlines: the never ending grind of the war in Ukraine, the rapidly shifting political tides back home in Washington, D.C., and a changing global balance that could completely redefine what we even call the West. Decisions being made this week will influence whether American troops deploy to Europe again, how much the US spends on defense, and how secure our allies feel when faced with nuclear armed adversaries. So, let's frame the whole conversation around one crucial question: is the United States comfortable letting others shape the security architecture of Europe? Or does it still see itself as the primary, indispensable guarantor of Western stability? That question, my friends, sits quietly behind every handshake, every photo op. Our story begins with what diplomats are nervously calling a three-step gauntlet in the search for a way out of the Ukraine war. Step 1 unfolded just this past weekend, right here in Germany. US and Ukrainian negotiators met for preliminary ceasefire discussions. But the key personnel are what made headlines. The American side was led by a close Trump envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner. This pairing signals a highly personalized, deal-making approach, moving away from a traditional bureaucratic process. The presence of Witkoff, a Trump envoy, suggests Washington sees a real chance for progress. Point. But here's the million-dollar question. Can such a private, personality-driven approach deliver a durable peace in a war as brutal and complex as the one in Ukraine? Or does it risk merely papering over deep, long-term problems for the sake of speed and a political win? Step 2 is happening right now. The formal summit on Monday, hosted by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and key European leaders in attendance. Publicly, the purpose is to reaffirm support for Kyiv. Privately, it is about Europe frantically aligning its negotiating strategy before Washington and Moscow potentially move ahead without them. European capitals are trying to balance multiple priorities: their solidarity with Ukraine, their deep fear of Russian aggression, and their serious concern about being sidelined by a more unilateral United States. The European diplomatic stance insists that Ukraine must be at the table and that negotiations must proceed in the right order. Then comes the possible third and most controversial step: a summit in Alaska between President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Trump's position is clear. This one-on-one meeting comes first. A broader gathering, including Ukraine and European leaders, would only follow if the initial talks produce what he calls the answers that we have to have. This raises a stark, almost unnerving question. Should the fate of a European war be shaped first in a bilateral, closed-door session between Washington and Moscow, with allies and the country under attack brought in only afterward? To understand where this is heading, we have to look at the emerging Trump doctrine on Ukraine and Europe. At its core is a blunt, transactional priority: end the war quickly. Sources suggest a leader who is far more interested in closing a deal and declaring success than in the long-term political stability of a distant democracy, and who doesn't really care about the situation in Ukraine beyond its strategic usefulness. This doctrine favors direct, often transactional dealings with strongmen like Putin, rather than slow consensus building with allies. Advisors confirm Trump doesn't want the Europeans stand between him and Vladimir Putin. viewing the continent as an obstacle to his preferred method. There is also a clear pressure tactic aimed at Ukraine's president. Trump has signaled that he will only meet with Zelensky again if the Ukrainian leader is willing to sign this so-called peace deal. The crucial question is whether this kind of leverage truly serves long-term American security, or whether it risks encouraging other authoritarian leaders to test how far such transactionalism can be pushed. Overlaying all of this is a powerful business-first instinct. Trump's desire to do business with China and do business with Russia is a core driver. This includes proposals for a G5 format that sidelines traditional Western groupings, suggesting commercial opportunities can weigh as heavily as security concerns. Deals like the sale of advanced NVIDIA H200 AI chips to China are watched closely here as a practical indicator of how Washington balances profit and power. Europe finds itself in an uncomfortable, squeezed middle position. They still rely heavily on U.S. military might, but they are wary of a peace plan that seems to demand Ukraine cede territory, abandon NATO ambitions, and accept lasting limits on its armed forces. European powers, Britain, France, and Germany, are actively working to refine the U.S. proposals. Their aim is twofold: keep negotiations alive and defend Ukrainian agency. They insist publicly that territorial questions concerning Ukraine can be and will be negotiated only by the Ukrainian president. But there is a stark strategic caution at play. European officials know that putting too much pressure on the U.S. president could all backfire, causing the U.S. to either disengage or strike a direct deal with Moscow, leaving Europe even more exposed. For Ukraine, the goal is simple to articulate: a dignified peace and credible, ironclad protection against another Russian invasion. After years of war, Ukrainians are desperate to avoid a settlement that simply freezes the front lines and waits for the next war. The options for security guarantees on the table are sobering. First is NATO-style Article 5, widely seen as unrealistic because it is hard to imagine NATO countries going to war with Russia. Second is the advanced weaponry, like Tomahawk missiles, previously suggested by Trump, but he backed down after Putin called it a red line. Third is NATO troop presence. Russia has explicitly stated it will not accept any foreign troops in Ukraine. Last but not least is fast-track EU membership. This is a viable option discussed in Washington and would bind Ukraine politically and economically to Europe. But it faces strong resistance within the EU due to established procedures. The fundamental dilemma is this: is the US comfortable pushing Kyiv toward concessions if the parallel security guarantees remain weak or uncertain? Now let's pivot thousands of miles east, because a decisive player sits in the background: China. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated plainly, without China's support, Russia could not continue to wage this war. China has become the economic and material lifeline for Russia for 3 reasons. First, energy purchases. China buys vast quantities of Russian energy that once flowed to Western markets. Second, material support. It supplies dual-use components for drones and military equipment and consumer goods like vehicles that keep the Russian economy functioning. Third, diplomatic shield. Beijing provides strong diplomatic backing, exemplified by Putin's prominent placement at a Chinese military parade. The strategic rationale is that China does not want Russia to suffer a defeat in this war, because Russia is its primary ally in its larger strategic struggle with the United States. For the US, this means any successful strategy to pressure Moscow will eventually have to grapple with Beijing's willingness to offset Western sanctions. The tensions we're seeing in Berlin are a symptom of a deeper, fundamental shift in the American worldview, a shift detailed in the new U.S. national security strategy. German Chancellor Merz has warned his own coalition that transatlantic relations are entering tougher, different times. The NSS codifies a new, highly ideological approach to foreign policy. Three core tenets stand out. Tenet 1: Europe in civilizational decline. This view is informed by a belief that Europe is decaying. The language used includes concepts like civilizational erasure and hints at an ethno-nationalist worldview like replacement theory, arguing that the nature of Europe is being fundamentally changed by mass immigration. President Trump has explicitly stated that most European nations, they're decaying. Yet here is the stark contradiction. The same NSS text affirms that Europe remains strategically and culturally vital to the United States, and that supporting European freedom is a top national vital interest. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte sees this as evidence of a complete commitment to European security. Let us look at the second tenet. Tenet 2: Deals over alliances. A new American model favors direct bilateral deals where U.S. power is most effective and least constrained. The preferred model is one where the U.S. speaks separately to Germany, France, Italy, etc., rather than to the EU as a bloc. This explicit support for aligned states rather than a European Union is seen as the administration's path to more favorable outcomes. Let us look at the third tenet, Tenet 3: Cultivating resistance. Perhaps the most sensitive aspect is the explicit intent to shape politics inside allied democracies. The NSS states a desire to cultivate resistance to Europe's current political trajectory within European nations. This has translated into action. First, on political engagement, Vice President J.D. Vance met with the head of Germany's far-right AfD party, Alice Weidel, away from the cameras in Munich. Second, on public endorsements, President Trump has been open in his support for figures like Hungary's Viktor Orban. Third, on growing network, there is a huge exchange and deepening relationship between members of the U.S. administration and far-right nationalist parties across Europe. What is the rationale, you may think? A perception that mainstream European governments are run de facto by minority coalitions, and that the majority is not being listened to. For Americans, this raises the fundamental question: should the U.S. actively pick sides inside allied democracies? Amid these ideological and diplomatic shifts, Europe is undergoing a massive, concrete response, a new urgency for rearmament. Chancellor Merz has been at pains to explain to his coalition that these are really tougher, different times. The drive to speed up defense investment is critical. NATO officials warn the pace is not sufficient. We need to speed up. And German generals have starkly warned we don't have time. This has a dual imperative. First, to keep Putin at bay, deterring a potential Russian attack on NATO territory within a few years. Second, to keep Trump on side, countering American perceptions that Europeans are dragging their feet on defense commitments. This presents a moment of opportunity for the U.S. A stronger Europe could mean a less financially and militarily burdened America, but the risk remains that a politically pressured Europe may seek greater autonomy, particularly in technology and trade. As this new transatlantic calculus takes shape, several critical questions remain unresolved, and they are the key indicators for all of us to watch. The Putin Summit. Will the Trump-Putin meeting happen? And what will a direct deal look like without European or Ukrainian input? Europe's pace. Can European nations accelerate rearmament and reform their armies quickly enough to meet the dual threats from Russia and a less reliable US? China's next move. Will Beijing continue its support for Russia? And under what conditions might it use its leverage for peace? Cultivating resistance. How far will the US go in actively intervening in European domestic politics, and could it backfire? For us, the most important question is the one we started with. What kind of West do we want to lead? One built on patient alliances and shared institutions, or one built on rapid, personalized deals and ideological battles that cross borders? The decisions being made this week are pushing us toward one of those futures. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments, do you think the US should focus more on one-on-one deals or strengthen the EU and NATO alliance?